Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another FNaF 3 video where I propose something for you to tear apart to your heart's content. Today we're tackling one of FNaF's longest standing mysteries, that being Happiest Day. For the uneducated, Happiest Day is a secret minigame that you can play in FNaF 3. It's actually one of the multiple secret minigames that you have to play in order to get the good ending of the game. I use the term good ending loosely because it's not actually called the good ending in the game, it's just called the end. Now on the surface, this set of minigames look decently simple. In each one, you take cake to a lost soul, and after doing so, the ghost child that you gave cake to will appear in the Happiest Day level. That's something to keep in mind as well. At any point during FNaF 3's gameplay, you're able to access Happiest Day by clicking on the drawing of the puppet in Camo 3. All of the minigames share a similar idea, where you, the player, interact with the world around you in order to play these 8-bit arcade-esque minigames. For BB's Air Adventure, you have to click on a drawing of Balloon Boy in Camo 8, and for Mangle's Quest, you have to go over to Camo 7 and click buttons on an arcade cabinet in a specific order. Some of them are night-specific, like Chica's Party. On night 3, cupcakes will appear in the cameras and you need to click on them to access her minigame. In any case, you get the picture. Once you've completed each respective minigame and given the spirits a delicious cake, you can go back to Happiest Day and bestow a birthday cake to one last ghost. You might also notice that 4 other spirits now stand at the table, each of which are wearing masks of the animatronic characters that they used to haunt. Afterwards, all the children suddenly disappear, with their masks slowly falling to the ground, some noticeably a little slower than others. Now, after completing the actual main game, you'll be greeted by a bittersweet image of the 4 classic animatronics at peace, as opposed to their eyes still being lit up in the bad ending of the game. Presumably, Golden Freddy would also still be in the back in the second ending as well, it's just that we can't see him because there isn't a light shining from his head like in the other ending. That's essentially the basics of Happiest Day and its adjacent minigames. Now, there's a little bit of a debate as to whether the children's spirits are actually freed here or not. I would say no, they aren't. I do personally believe that William Afton used the remnant of the classics for his fun times. However, that doesn't really matter for this discussion. Today I want to talk about what Happiest Day actually is. Whether or not the missing children are freed isn't necessarily the point at the moment. We'll get to that later though. For starters, I want to break down some of the more weird stuff about Happiest Day, such as why these particular sprites are the ones we play as in the minigames. For those who aren't new around here, you might recall that I've actually discussed this before in a previous theory, but for the sake of this topic, I'm going to reiterate some of what I said there. In these minigames, we play as Balloon Boy, Mangle, Toy Chica, Golden Freddy, Shadow Bonnie, and the Puppet. But that's a weird cast, isn't it? However, these aren't just random picks like you might think they are. Actually, all these characters connect back to one thing, the crying child from FNaF 4. Remember how Toy Chica loses her beak in FNaF 2 when she leaves the stage? Well, in FNaF 4, the crying child saw a toy figure of Chica with its beak off. Also in FNaF 2, we have Mangle, a take apart and put back together attraction for the kids. That's the exact wording Phone Guy uses, by the way.
The staff literally had to put Foxy back together at the end of every shift. Eventually they just stopped trying and left him as some kind of take-apart, put-back-together attraction.
In FNaF 4, when you enter what is most likely Elizabeth Afton's bedroom, we see Mangle on the floor of the bedroom, in pieces of course. As for Balloon Boy, well, you might recall that on his way home from Fredbear's, the crying child runs into another kid that bears a striking resemblance to Balloon Boy. Is this kid actually Balloon Boy? No, of course not, but the similarity is definitely there, and I think these minigame sprites are all in reference to the crying child's memories. Balloon Boy is just the closest thing to who this kid is. Now what about Golden Freddy and Shadow Bonnie? Well, Golden Freddy should be obvious. Fredbear is the animatronic that killed the poor fella. The plush that talks to crying child throughout FNaF 4 is also, of course, a Fredbear plushie. Shadow Bonnie might be a little bit more complicated though, but there is a connection between him and the crying child. As the crying child is being dragged to his demise by Michael and the other bullies, there are 2 shadows that are casted from the main stage before they actually reach where the animatronics are. Fun fact, The shade of purple that Shadow Bonnie is in FNAF 3 is the exact same shade of purple that these shadows are too. I don't want to get too off track here, but I personally believe that these shadow animatronics are creatures born out of agony. More specifically, I think they were created from the agony surrounding particular events in the series. In my ShatterVictim video, I said the MCI and DCI could have been what made them, but it's also possible that the agony surrounding the crying child and Charlie's death could have been the source as well, or maybe even just the crying child's death. Either way, I think it was the crying child that influenced the shadow animatronics. I know, big claim, let me break it down for you. So let's say that the shadows came from the crying child's death. Well, why would they appear as Freddy and Bonnie? Well, those were the two animatronics that the crying child saw last, and like I said before, he saw the menacing shadows casting from the stage prior to being thrown into Fredbear's mouth. That's why they look like dark, shadowy versions of these characters. However, as you might be aware, Shadow Bonnie in particular looks more like Toy Bonnie as opposed to Spring Bonnie. That's why I think it's viable to consider that the shadows could have come from the MCI or DCI respectively. Cause then you could justify Shadow Bonnie's appearance if Shadow Bonnie came from the agony of the DCI, since Toy Bonnie appears in FNAF 2. Whatever you want to believe, the shadows, or at least Shadow Bonnie here, represents another fragment of the crying child's memory. Oh, and yes, I am purposefully referring to it as his memory. Sounds weird, right? Why would these sprites be representative of the crying child's memory of all things? Well, like I mentioned before, it seems that the crying child's agony has affected the entire series, but how? Well, we see in FNAF 4 that the crying child is in constant torment. He's sobbing his eyes out wherever he goes, and he lives in constant fear thanks to his older brother. William's not exactly winning Father of the Year awards either. If anything, he seems to be quite neglectful and absent. This all tops off with the crying child's death, where his terror would be at its highest as he struggles within the jaws of the very thing he fears most. For those who might be a little confused when I say the crying child's agony, basically it's part of FNAF's weird supernatural stuff. Essentially, we learn from the books that emotions in FNAF can have real power to them, and agony in particular is a very strong emotion/sensation. Imagine emotions as if they were types of energy. Tragic events or objects near sites of immense suffering would be spewing mass amounts of that agony energy. That's why I don't think the crying child actually possesses a particular animatronic. I think after his death, the crying child shatters into pieces, both in soul and memory. These secret minigames that we play in FNAF 3 are some of those fragments coming back together in order to free the crying child. I know, a big claim, but it's not unwarranted. Here, let me break it down for you. In FNAF World, when you're talking to Fredbear, you'll be able to get some interesting lines of dialogue if you wait around long enough after he's done talking. Suddenly, the friendly Fredbear becomes a creepy, glitching, pixelated bear, reminiscent of the plush from FNAF 4. We'll call him Glitch Bear for simplicity's sake. Glitch Bear has some interesting lines for us.
There is a task for you to complete. You have to leave breadcrumbs for him to help him find his way.
And
the truth is that there is no safe place. You don't understand that. You were made for one thing.
the task that Glitch Bear sends us to complete involves these clocks that we can find throughout FNAF World. Upon interacting with these clocks, we're taken to mini-games that seem to reference back to FNAF 3. These mini-games are the breadcrumbs that have to be left for the crying child. They very clearly are supposed to be setting up Happiest Day. In one, we place Balloon Boy into a box, and another involves us stepping on the same arcade buttons that you click on in order to play Mango's Quest in FNAF 3. Once again, the rest follow a similar idea. Now, what FNAF World is exactly is a little bit more tricky, especially because the clock ending isn't the only ending you can get in this game. I mean, Scott Cawthon is literally a boss that you could fight, and so is Chipper. The game is pretty meta in that regard, but that doesn't mean the lore in the game is any less important. I think there's a discussion to be had about FNAF's use of meta storytelling, but that's a topic for another day. But again, if you wait to talk to Glitch Bear, he mentions
the world beneath the surface world.
I think there's something a lot of people misunderstand when it comes to the weird shortcuts you're able to take in FNAF World, i.e. the glitched objects I mentioned before, which take you to the Flipside. Except, No, this is not the Flipside. Fredbear nor Glitchbear ever refer to this place as the Flipside. They call these subtunnels. These subtunnels let you access other areas in the game that you otherwise can't get to, but go too far deep into the layers of these subtunnels and you'll be lost forever. Just as Fredbear said, these fractures that allow us to enter these subtunnels are a byproduct of something that happened on the flip side. But then, what is the flip side? Well, that's easy. It's the real world. No, not our world, silly, but the real world of Five Nights at Freddy's. FNaF world is the world beneath the surface world, and the subtunnels are just what the name suggests. They're the layers between the real world and this one. Things in the real world can affect this place, and I think the vice versa is true. Oh, but by the way, can you remind me of what the opening of FNaF World tells us?
Everything that happens out there has an effect here. Do you understand?
Well, that's pretty cut and dry then, isn't it? You might be asking what all that has to do with Happiest Day. Well, like I said before, it's FNaF World which lays out the breadcrumbs for the crying child's soul to be eventually freed in Happiest Day. By uniting these fragments of the crying child, he's put back together just as he was promised in FNaF 4. But still, the question remains, what exactly is FNaF World? What I want you to keep in mind for now is everything we've talked about so far, because we're going to shift gears once again and talk about something else for the moment, the infamous Survival Logbook. At the time of writing this script, the Survival Logbook is a pretty hot topic right now, mostly because of Hyperdroid's theory involving the possible solution to the crying child's name. Oddly enough, we're not actually going to talk about what the crying child's name may or may not be. That isn't necessarily important. What is important is some of the other details regarding the Survival Logbook, i.e. the faded, altered, and red text. We know for certain that Mike is the writer of the red text. His name is written in red on the front page of the book. Meanwhile, altered text is theorized to be the crying child, and the faded is theorized to be Cassidy. Cassidy, if you aren't aware, is the spirit that possesses the Golden Freddy suit. Throughout the logbook, you can see that Faded asks various different questions that Altered more or less answers. For example, Faded asks, "What do you see?" And Altered says, "I can't see." Faded asks other questions in the logbook as well, but the answers Altered gives, for the ones he answers anyway, tend to be vague. Faded asks, "Does he still talk to you?" and "Is this song familiar to you?" But the closest answer you could find for either would be, "I can hear sounds." The questions being asked are what's important here though, because they are all in reference to the crying child. Was your favorite childhood toy a plastic purple telephone? Most likely refers to the toy we see in the FNaF 4 bedroom. The question, "Does he still talk to you?" is found on a page with a depiction of a Fredbear plush, referring to the plush that talked to the crying child throughout FNaF 4. Faded also asks if Altered remembers their name, but there's no reply unless you count the "it's me" you can find in the word searches. However, Altered actually asks Faded a question too, that being, "What is your name?" Common knowledge by now, but the logbook is how we found out Cassidy's name via the word search on page 58. It's also worth noting that Mike writes a hint in the form of 811 on page 108, which is supposed to be a clue towards figuring out Cassidy's name, but he also gives us another clue, or at least a starting point. Throughout the book, you'll find these tallies, and much like the Foxy Grid, it's been a debate on what exactly they'd be used for. I really do recommend watching Hyperdroid's recent video. If anything, it's pretty interesting, and it goes in depth about the logbook. In his video, he deposited that the tallies could have been another hint for the Cassidy word search. But again, the actual answers here aren't important for this theory. What's important is that the questions and puzzles here are all in an effort to make the crying child remember his past. It's established in various places throughout the series that the dead don't tend to remember very well. That's why Cassidy asks so many questions about the crying child's life. Once again, we have an instance where we're trying to help the crying child gather his memories. Do you see what I'm starting to get at? There's something Faded says to Altered that I think is mighty interesting. The party was for you, and Altered says it was for me. Now, you might be thinking of the fact that Crying Child died on his birthday, but I don't think that's what it's referring to. I think it's referring to Happiest Day. Let's switch gears back to FNAF 3 for a hot minute. We've cemented that these minigames have to do with the Crying Child's memories, and that they basically function as fragments that we have to bring together in order to free the Crying Child. But if that's the case, why do we give the missing children cake in these minigames? Why are the sprites doing it? To answer that, I once again direct you to FNAF 4. In the very first minigame scene of FNAF 4, we see the Crying Child refer to the Freddy's characters as his friends. The differentiation is that he is absolutely terrified of the actual animatronics, but the characters themselves he does like, hence the plushies in his room. Fast forward into the game a little, and when Crying Child is on his way home, he meets a girl with pigtails who tells him a rumor involving the animatronics.
You'd better watch out. I hear they come to life at night, and if you die, they hide your body and never tell anyone.
Remind me, what's that one incident in FNAF that constantly comes up? Oh right, that one time when William Afton killed a bunch of kids then stuffed the bodies into the animatronics. The same kids that we give cake to in FNAF 3's minigames. The reason we also help the other spirits in FNAF 3 is because they are also connected to the Crying Child. Not because they personally knew the dude, but because they inhabit the very characters he once called his friends. The very thing the Crying Child was warned about happened to them, and so they carry a piece of the Crying Child's soul. For those of you who watched that video I mentioned earlier, or those who are also familiar with the concept of ShatterVictim and MemoryVictim, this all might sound familiar. That video I did was slightly mistitled though, because what I described in that video is actually more in line with MemoryVictim as opposed to ShatterVictim. Yeah, I know, this is a lot of FNAF talk at the moment, bear with me fellas. ShatterVictim refers to the idea that the Crying Child's spirit is shattered across the 5 other animatronics, / the missing children themselves. Variations of the theory also include the puppet. Neither here nor there though. MemoryVictim refers to the idea that I described earlier, how the Crying Child's memory or agony, whichever way you want to put it, influences certain aspects of the series, i.e. Toy Chica's beak. Here's the thing though. I don't think either theory is exclusive to themselves. If you couldn't gather during this video, I very much think that both of these concepts are true to the story. They basically work in tandem even. With that in mind, I think we've set the basis of what Happiest Day is. But let's go over it one more time just to be clear. In FNAF World, we complete these clock minigames after being sent to do them by Glitchbear. Each clock minigame sets up the secret minigames we later play in FNAF 3, and the sprites that we play as represent fragments or pieces of the Crying Child's memory. By completing these minigames, we bring the other children together as well, along with the pieces of Crying Child's spirit that they hold. When all the pieces of Crying Child's spirit are brought together to celebrate the birthday party the Crying Child never had, he's finally able to move on, which removes one more shackle from the other spirits as well. If you're confused by what I mean, I don't think the children's spirits are freed here. Again, I point back to that line from the Survival Logbook, "The party was for you." Note that the layout of Happiest Day is basically the same layout as Fredbear's from FNAF 4, just flipped. As someone who believes that after dismantled the classics to use the remnant for his fun times, I think Happiest Day is something that needs to happen before the spirits are able to be freed. Remember how I mentioned that the MCI hold pieces of the Crying Child spirit? I think it boils down to one of two things. A, they can't move on until the Crying Child is set free because of the fact he's attached to them, or B, they are just helping him move on and Happiest Day doesn't really have anything to do with freeing them necessarily. To reiterate once again, this entire shindig is for the Crying Child. It's the birthday he never had because it was ruined for him. After FNAF 3, we have FNAF 6, and that's when the other ghost children are freed from the confines that William Afton forced them into. Just something to note as well, in every iteration of these spirits being freed, or something along those lines, it never has anything to do with something such as Happiest Day. It always involves their animatronic bodies being scrapped or destroyed, which allows them their freedom. Yeah, in the 4th closet, Carlton helps the children realize who the killer is by altering that drawing, but that isn't what happens Happiest Day is, and even then, that doesn't really help free them necessarily. That just makes them turn on William Afton. It's diving into the fire that actually sets them free. In FNaF 2, we're told that the toy animatronics are scrapped after the pizzeria closes, which would mean that the souls inside those robots were probably freed. We've been told that heat is the key to all of this. As the blueprint in FNaF 6 states, substance should be malleable but not more. There's a possibility that overheating might neutralize the effects permanently. That's why Henry opts to burn them in FNaF 6. By lighting them aflame at a very hot temperature, it's certain to destroy the remnant and set the children's souls free. Now, I could leave everything we've talked about there. We've gone over a lot already, and good God, I know too much about this franchise. However, there's still two questions I haven't answered. Who does Happiest Day, and how literal are these minigames? Are these literal arcade games, or are they symbolic, or what? This one has always been tough to think about, and I feel like it's the part of my theory that's going to get the most disagreement, let's say. So, for starters, let's point out the odd fact that it's not just Happiest Day's minigames which are, well, weird, put simply. During the ending of FFPS, we see on the monitor screen in front of us a few minigames that we're all familiar with. While Henry is talking to his daughter Charlie, we see the Give Cake minigame from FNaF 2 pop up, along with the Security Puppet minigame from FFPS. Give Gifts, Give Life also makes an appearance. In Security Breach and Help Wanted 2, we can play Princess Quest, an actual arcade cabinet that allows us to free Vanessa from the clutches of Glitch Trap after we've beaten it. Now, Help Wanted 2's ending is a little bit more interpretive, let's say, but you get the idea of actual arcade games having direct significance and impact on the story. Now, do I think stuff like FNaF 2's death minigames are actual games that somebody would have played? No, not at all. However, I do think that these secret minigames from FNaF 3 are played in a sense. In Ultimate Custom Night, if you just have Old Man Consequences active and set to the rough difficulty of 1, you'll get a small minigame very reminiscent of FNaF World. Actually, it's literally the same setup. Much like in FNaF World, we play as a red Freddy sprite that talks to Old Man Consequences. He tells us to come and sit with him a while, and that we should leave the demon to his demons. Rest your own soul, there is nothing else. Now, I'm not here to debate who is the vengeful Andrew. Sorry, I mean Spirit. However, I do think it's telling that this exists to begin with. Old Man Consequences is a weird choice for Ultimate Custom Night. Not to mention that his 8-bit pixelated setup here is exactly how we saw it in FNaF World. Presumably, the Freddy sprite here would be Golden Freddy or Cassidy. So here we have an example of an existing character interacting with a surreal setting that originally only existed within the confines of a meta scenario. Not to mention that UCN in of itself is some sort of purgatory, if you will. A conscious nightmare created for William Afton so that he could be made to suffer. Why is that important? Well, the fact that UCN isn't actually real, but that Old Man Consequences exists within it is an example of something I'm going to call consciousness application. UCN is all inside Afton's head. The vengeful spirit has attached to him and is forcing him through this hellish torment. Yet while Afton is experiencing this otherworldly horror, Cassidy is able to have a chit-chat with Old Man Consequences in the room next door. Note that during this scene, you can hear Afton calling out for Mike and Henry's help. This scene is in the nebulous space of Ultimate Custom Night, but Ultimate Custom Night is in William Afton's head, an illusion forced upon him where he dies over and over again. What I'm trying to get at here is that I think William Afton's soul has been dragged down to a subset of the subtunnels from FNaF World. Note that on the desk of UCN, enemies from FNaF World can appear, such as Tangle, Bounce Pot, and even White Rabbit. We've already talked about Old Man Consequences, but if you have FNaF World installed on your computer and you do the OMC Easter egg in UCN, it'll give you the Drown Trophy in FNaF World. Once again, we have direct connections between the real world of FNaF and the cartoonish landscape of FNaF World. Even though Afton's body remains in the real world, his consciousness and soul are imprisoned in this other level of existence, as if he were trapped in a nightmare.
This is a nightmare that you won't wake from. I am given flesh to be your tormentor. I will vomit you back to relieve your horror.
But what does this all have to do with Happiest Day and the minigames that connect to it? Well, remember how we talked about FNaF World setting up those said minigames that we play in FNaF 3? I think the Happiest Day minigames are another example of this consciousness application that I spoke of. No, you're not literally playing a cabinet, but the player is using their mind to interact with a very meta and bizarre thing that otherwise doesn't make a lot of logical sense. That's because these mini-games like FNaF World and even UCN all exist on a level of being that borderlines on the metaphysical. To that end, they do have an amount of literalness to them, just as Old Man Consequences seen in UCN and the Princess Quest games do. Okay, so we've gotten all that out of the way, but what about who we actually play as? Or rather, who helps initiate Happiest Day? For starters, I don't think it's the puppet. That might seem like the obvious answer. After all, in the Survival Logbook, we see a depiction of the puppet giving a birthday cake to a little girl that strikingly resembles Cassidy. However, there's an issue with that. Now, yes, the sprite that you play as in Happiest Day is the puppet, and I'd even go as far to say that this is the actual puppet, or Charlotte if you prefer. But as we've cemented already, the other sprites that you play as all have to do with the crying child, and there's nothing to suggest that the puppet is playing or controlling these sprites. Yes, this drawing from the logbook is of the puppet, but duh, we already knew we played as it in the actual Happiest Day minigame. This has nothing to do with the other minigames. In order to access these minigames, you have to interact with the world around you. You, the player, do that. It's not a death minigame or an arcade machine, it's you who goes through these odd steps in order to achieve Happiest Day. But if it's the player helping with Happiest Day and playing these games, why does the night restart after you accomplish each step? Well, at the end of the day, you still have to play through FNaF 3 in order to reach any sort of ending. It's still a video game at the end of the day, and if completing these mini-games skipped you through the night instead, then that would defeat the purpose of the game. I know that might not be a satisfying answer, you might even think it's a cop-out, and I get that. But remember when I was talking about the Survival Logbook and I mentioned how Mike helps out with the Cassidy word search, and how Cassidy tries to help the crying child remember his name? If the logbook really is a conversation between the three, and Mike is trying to help the crying child remember his past, well, we've already talked about why the crying child's memories are important. Would that mean that Michael is the one that helps with Happiest Day? Considering how he helps Cassidy and the crying child in the logbook, and how the minigame sprites are heavily tied to the crying child's memory, I definitely think it's possible Mike could be our culprit, especially if you think Mike is the FNaF 3 Night Guard. However, I know not everyone would agree with that. I know some people might not be sold on the player themselves helping with Happiest Day, and to be fair, I do think there's another possible answer that might work even better. Golden Freddy. Or rather, Cassidy. Cassidy is the one that actually directly talks to the crying child in the logbook, asking him an assortment of questions to help jog his memory. Cassidy is the spirit that haunts the very suit that killed the crying child, the very character that used to be the crying child's best friend. Glitch Bear is a distorted version of Fredbear, and he is the one that sends us on that quest in FNaF World. Golden Freddy is also who we play as in that Old Man Consequences thing from UCN, and I've already gone into all that. Now that comes with a pretty big can of worms. It would mean that this child here that we give cake to in Happiest Day is probably the crying child. That's not impossible, but the fact that he puts on a Golden Freddy mask is a little weird if he doesn't actually possess a suit. Now, to be fair, it's possible that he does accompany Cassidy in the Fredbear suit. In the latest interactive novel the week before, there's a 1983 reference that might imply Golden Duo. It's a little messy though, right? That's why I opted for the answer of Mike being the one who helps with Happiest Day for all the reasons I've already mentioned. If you want a little bit more context to that idea, check out my sister location placement video where I actually do touch on why Mike would help with Happiest Day. The last thing I want to touch on is when I think Happiest Day actually takes place. There's really only two likely scenarios it can happen, and that's after FNaF 3 or after FNaF 6. Some would say the latter because that's when the children's souls are actually freed from Molten Freddy, and that's fair enough. However, my issue with that is the fact the minigames you play in order to achieve Happiest Day are all in FNaF 3. 3. It would be weird for these mini-games to all happen during FNaF 3, but the actual send-off which we see in FNaF 3 is an arbitrary amount of time later. With the fact that this party is for the crying child, I think it makes most sense for Happiest Day to happen at the end of FNaF 3, because this is when the crying child is freed, not the other spirits. But maybe that's just me. Whatever the case may be, I hope you at least enjoyed the video a little bit. If anything, maybe it gave your brain something to chew on. If you did enjoy the video, feel free to leave a like or even a comment down below. I always like to see what people's thoughts are on a topic or what their opinion on a theory might be. Subscribing would also definitely be appreciated. Oh, and before I forget, I have a Discord server. If you want to know when I'm posting, streaming, or what I might be working on, you can join that. Sometimes we play Minecraft or Roblox on stream, so if that's something you think you'd be interested in joining, you can go down to the description and click on the link below to join the server. Besides that, I thank you thoroughly for watching, and I hope you have a good day, or night, whichever it is for you. Either way, I will see you next time. Peace out.